Hello there, I am Greta Aurora. Misogyny is so widespread that I had to be told it existed. I wouldn't have realized otherwise. When I was growing up in Hungary, it was just obvious to me that I could be whoever and whatever I wanted to be. And I believe I speak for all my female friends when I say that no one had ever suggested to us that we couldn't or shouldn't study a particular subject or choose a specific profession. Sex and gender just weren't topics of discussion at the time. I grew up thinking of myself first and foremost as a human being. Seeing what's going on at schools today, I feel I was incredibly privileged to have narrowly escaped and become an adult before the onset of pathological identity politics and wokeness. The word feminism had never resonated with me. I remember thinking to myself, at around the age of 15 or 16, that the only ism I'd be willing to stand behind was humanism. If one was to fight for equality for everyone, why call it feminism? It just felt instinctively wrong to me. Fast forward to 2014, I remember the moment someone spoke to me about misogyny for the first time ever. It was a guy. It felt incredibly condescending and patronizing. I could not believe my ears. I had just completed my undergraduate studies in biology. My science education had taught me to always question everything, ask for evidence, and never take anything I am told at face value. That strange conversation took place a few weeks into my master's degree at University College London. I was studying science, technology, and society. Unfortunately, the lecturers didn't place much emphasis on the science bit, and neither did the students. I was having lunch with this guy from my course one day. We were talking about art, specifically photography, and I told him I was a model, and I loved looking at images of beautiful women. To which he replied, "Unfortunately, women are often objectified in art and commercials." I had never heard the word objectification in a serious context before. In fact, I thought he was joking at first. But I soon realized social justice warriors didn't have a sense of humor. I responded, "I don't think it's objectification. I see it as a modern form of goddess worship." My male feminist friend then went on to explain how the patriarchy has brainwashed women into glorifying their own oppression. And that's the story of how I learned I was oppressed. After this conversation, I felt inspired to find out more about how feminists view the world. And that's how I officially became an anti-feminist. Now that you know a little bit about my background, I'd like to take you through 10 of my favorite feminist myths about misogyny and rape culture, and shed light on why these are all inaccurate and false. Myth 1. Throughout most of history, women have been oppressed by men. I reject the idea that women have ever been oppressed by men at any point in history in any society. I believe what feminists interpret as oppression is really vigorous protection. Feminism as an ideology has been influenced by both Rousseau and Marx, hence its distorted view of history and culture. The French philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau romanticized the purity and benevolence of nature. He also claimed that the ideal stage of human development was the savage, who lived in perfect harmony with nature before civilization corrupted them. In his book, Discourse on the Origin of Inequality, he wrote, "Nothing is so gentle as man in his primitive state, when placed by nature at an equal distance from the stupidity of brutes and the fatal enlightenment of civil man. Civilization is the root of all evil, according to Rousseau. This viewpoint is extremely naive and even childish. Human nature cannot be inherently good and benevolent, because nature itself is not good and benevolent. In fact, human civilization serves as the defense from the horrors of nature. Society protects both men and women, but especially women, from violence. The rapist is not the product of too much socialization, but too little. A century after Rousseau, Karl Marx formulated his philosophy and theory of economics, according to which history was merely a story of the oppression of the weak by the strong. Marx viewed society through the cold lens of power, and saw nothing but the oppressed and the oppressors pitted against each other. But not everything in life is about power. And even if it was, women still wouldn't be oppressed. A world where women are oppressed would look very different to our world. Even in Islamic countries, where women's freedom of movement is extremely limited, we cannot really talk about oppression. These societies aim to protect women from the outside world by shielding them like a precious diamond. In the West, the goal of women's liberation has been to free us from overprotection. But freedom means not just rights, but also responsibilities. That's why I'm in favor of a women's responsibilities movement rather than a women's rights movement. Myth 2. The Western world is a patriarchy that encourages misogyny. Feminists have misused the word patriarchy so much that I'm not even sure what it means anymore. They tend to use it in the context of male privilege and male power, which is an erroneous premise. Men and women are both powerful in different ways, but neither sex is more powerful than the other in an absolute sense. The problem with any form of identity politics is that it attributes to the individual the characteristics of the group he or she supposedly belongs to. As a result, all groups within society are described as homogeneous and monolithic, with no space for nuance. The 20th century showed us why this is a bad idea. Fascism and communism are guilty of making this fatal mistake, and so is feminism. Not only do feminists paint all men with the same broad brush, but they attribute the very worst characteristics of the most evil men to all men, while simultaneously portraying all women as innocent and infallible angels with the purest of hearts. There is no worldwide conspiracy of men coming together to oppress women. There is no secret society which all men are part of, and which excludes all women. The myth of the patriarchy is a convenient scapegoat for women who don't want to take responsibility for their own actions, failures, and mistakes. After all, it's always easier to blame someone else for our own shortcomings. The truth is, women actually have it easier than men in many areas of life. Discrimination at education and work has long been outlawed, and therefore feminists who claim oppression do so by citing personal experiences of misogyny. More about this later. True gender equality is impossible to achieve if we view the relationship between the genders as a form of war. We must acknowledge we're all on the same side. We're all in this together. Feminists are desperate to win a war against men and they celebrate any issues men face as victory. What they fail to understand is that if either side defeats the other, everyone loses. If we strive to make the world a better place for one gender at the expense of the other, we can only end up making it worse for everyone. Women don't exist in a vacuum, and neither do men. We must set common goals and work together to achieve these. Myth 3. Western beauty standards are the invention of the patriarchy. Let's take a look at some depictions of the ideal woman from different cultures and historical eras. 7,000 years ago in Eastern Europe. 4,000 years ago in Babylon. 3,000 years ago in Greece. 2,000 years ago in Egypt. 2,000 years ago in Greece. 1,000 years ago in India. 1,000 years ago in China. 500 years ago in Italy. 150 years ago in England. 70 years ago in Nigeria. 50 years ago in America. And at our present time. Did you notice anything interesting? All these depictions of the female figure are strikingly similar. Their proportions, especially the waist-to-hip ratio, are uncannily consistent across civilizations throughout the millennia. This shows that our perception of female beauty is instinctive and inherent, rather than socially constructed. A multitude of studies have shown that men have a preference for a low waist-to-hip ratio, and both sexes rate symmetrical bodies and faces more attractive than asymmetrical ones. The obvious biological reason for this is that a low waist-to-hip ratio is a sign of fertility in a woman, and bodily and facial symmetry signals health in both men and women. Please note that the images I showed you are all meant to be attractive and erotic. We can, of course, find examples of mother goddesses in various cultures, but these do not take away from the validity of the point I'm making. Depictions of mothers, like the Venus of Willendorf from roughly 30,000 years ago, were probably used in fertility rituals and were not meant to be erotic or sensual in nature. Myth 4. The representation of the female body in art and the media is evidence of misogyny. Of course, this could not be further from the truth. We know that sex sells, but what that really means is that the female body sells. No brand can go wrong by featuring a gorgeous woman in its advertising, whether on her own or in the company of a handsome man. Art galleries all over the world are full of paintings of beautiful women. We can sometimes find depictions of beautiful men too, although these are generally limited to Western art. How bitter and cynical does one have to be to view all the stunning representations of femininity as evidence of misogyny? If this is not jealousy on the part of feminists, I don't know what it is. The guerrilla girls miss the point so badly. The fact that most artists are male and most muses are female is not a sign of misogyny, but the exact opposite. It's an example of man's worship of female beauty. By downplaying the significance of biological and psychological differences between the sexes, it is no surprise feminists fail to understand the true nature of male-female interactions. Men's attraction and arousal is driven by visual stimuli, whereas women are unlikely to be turned on by a man's looks alone. No matter how desperately feminists try to wish these differences away and demand men become more like women, they won't be able to eradicate the evolutionary heritage of hundreds of thousands of years overnight. Myth 5. Catcalling is misogynistic. Like art, catcalling is also an expression of man's admiration of woman. Whistling and shouting is a lot less sophisticated than painting a beautiful picture. But both practices are rooted in adoration rather than hatred. Some feminists have attempted to stage scenarios of reverse catcalling to raise awareness of what they see as a major problem.
Oh, hey! You look like you love commitment.
Oh boy, hey, what you got under that shirt, sweetie? Bet it's a good heart.
What these feminists fail to realize is that there already exists a female equivalent of catcalling. Dressing and behaving in a sexually provocative manner. This is the way a woman desperate for attention can get the attention she craves. The men who do the catcalling are closer to the bottom of the dominance hierarchy than to the top, and they know they have to work extra hard to be noticed by women. People who feel invisible are bound to grow resentful. The middle-aged male gambling addict catcalling a beautiful young woman knows very well that his actions are not going to get him anywhere. All he is after is a quick glance, however dismissive. On the other hand, a middle-aged woman throwing herself at attractive young men at a bar may get a one-night stand, but she knows she can't expect anything more than that. Both the man catcalling and the woman turning herself into a sex object will get noticed eventually, but neither will receive genuine respect and attention. Both of these strategies are the last resort for people who don't believe they would be noticed by the opposite sex any other way. Myth 6. The wage gap is a result of misogyny. The wage gap myth has been debunked again and again numerous times, and yet feminists keep coming back to it. Women cannot be in such a bad position in society if feminists need to distort statistics and resort to misrepresentations in order to make a point. If you add up all the money men make and all the money women make, and then calculate the averages by gender, of course there's going to be a difference. But if you don't take any other factors into account beyond gender, you're just doing very bad science. It's like doing a survey amongst people who wear a suit for work and people who wear jeans, and concluding that people who wear suits earn more simply because of their choice of attire. You can then introduce a quota requiring 50% of all employees at any workplace to wear a suit, but that's not going to help waiters and cleaners earn more. The only way you can increase your salary is by choosing a better paid job. Jobs that are more fulfilling and that offer more convenient working hours are inevitably going to pay less, simply because more people will be competing for those jobs. Even without taking women's reproductive choices into account, research shows that women place a higher value on a good quality of life than they do on earning a six-figure income. Even single women tend to have priorities in life other than their career. the overrepresentation of men in high-paying positions and political leadership cannot be attributed to misogyny. There are women who aspire to sit on executive boards and hold political offices. But there are simply more men with such aspirations. The education system is not to blame for this, as some would claim. Not all men want to be CEOs and politicians. Rather, it's a small minority of workaholic men competing against each other for these positions. And I say, let them. I don't want that kind of life. And I don't want feminists to tell me the only way to be empowered is to work 100 hours a week. And when a man and a woman do the exact same job, the man is still more likely to work more hours than the woman, and therefore justifiably earn more. Work is a sacrifice, not a privilege. Myth 7. 1 in 5 college women are sexually assaulted. Feminists expect us to take this fact at face value and never challenge it. It has even been repeated by politicians.
It is estimated that 1 in 5 women on college campuses has been sexually assaulted during their time there. 1 in 5.
And most people blindly believe it when they hear it. This number comes from a report published in 2007 titled The Campus Sexual Assault Study. This survey was carried out online with a non-representative sample of respondents and vaguely worded questions. The US Bureau of Justice Statistics published a much more reliable report in 2013, based on official data spanning 18 years. According to this study, 1 in 52 college-age women have been the victim of sexual assault, which is still a lot, but it's 10 times less than the popular 1 in 5 figure. On the other hand, studies have found that 1 in 6 men were sexually abused by the age of 18. The bottom line is, only a deluded feminist could insist Western university campuses are as dangerous for women as the Democratic Republic of Congo in Central Africa, where they have actual rape camps using sexual violence as punishment. The Me Too movement has succeeded in perpetuating this myth and encouraged men to ask for consent at every single stage of an intimate encounter. It is not surprising, then, that millennials are having far less sex than any generation ever before. Feminism has greatly damaged men's confidence in their sexuality by demonizing all aspects of masculine aggression and competition. Unless these traits are expressed by women, of course. As a result, feminism has forced men to unlearn the very characteristics women are attracted to. It's no secret that women enjoy getting intimate with dominant men, and they're even more likely to achieve orgasm with these men. Contemporary Western culture sends an incredibly confusing mixed message to men by insisting they should be nice and soft and cautious at all times, while at the same time their girlfriends and wives are salivating over books and films like 50 Shades of Grey. It doesn't help that we rarely hear about male victims of sexual assault in the media, bombarding boys and men with the message that they are all potential abusers, while showing no support for male victims is a recipe for disaster. Then there's the issue of false rape accusations. Myth 8. False rape accusations are extremely rare. Feminists like to claim only 2% of all rape accusations are false. But there's plenty of evidence to suggest that the real number is much higher than that. The numbers vary significantly, depending on the country, the exact demographics surveyed, and the definitions used. The percentage will be at the higher end of the estimate if we count instances where there was a miscommunication of desires and where the woman was under the influence of alcohol or drugs. Confirming consent at every stage of a sexual encounter is a ludicrous requirement, but if a woman does not want to go any further, she must clearly voice it. Despite what feminists want us to believe, most men are not inclined to rape, and they will stop if their partner is uncomfortable. But men cannot read minds, and if a woman is uncomfortable, she has to say so. A man should not be punished for a woman's inability to communicate what she does and does not want. When it comes to intoxication, feminists like to claim a woman cannot consent to sex in that mental state. But if women want the right to be treated as competent adults, we must agree to take responsibility for our actions in return for this right. It is outrageous to demand a right without accepting a corresponding responsibility. Feminists love playing this game, but they should not be able to get away with it. It's not the man's fault if a woman drinks so much that she is unable to make rational decisions. We are all responsible for staying in control of our own mind. There are, of course, instances where a man will try to drug a woman. The presence of drugs makes everything more complicated. But if all she did was drink, then she most probably did that out of her own free will. And no one else is responsible for that choice and for the consent a woman gives as a result of that choice. Withdrawing consent following the act is a preposterous idea. Now, of course, I'm not talking about cases where a woman or a man has passed out and someone else takes advantage of them in that state. Myth 9. The majority of domestic violence victims are women. Domestic violence is one of the most underreported crimes, so accurate statistics are difficult to come by. But men may be even less likely to report abuse due to the stigma and perceived weakness of a man falling victim to a woman. A male victim may also fear he will be the one getting arrested if he calls the police. Some research suggests that men and women commit domestic violence against each other in similar numbers. If children are also present in the household, the man may be even more reluctant to report the crime or leave the home, because the children would be at a great risk of harm if they were left alone with the woman. Sadly, a man's attempts to rescue himself and his children may give the impression that the man is abducting them. As long as the common misconceptions around the gendered nature of domestic violence persist, male victims will remain unlikely to contact the police. It does not help that there are hardly any shelters available for men who are abused by their partners. In England and Wales, for example, there are 7,500 refuge spaces available for women, but only 60 for men. Myth 10. Women are more likely to be murdered than men. Whenever I encounter self-described rat femmes on Twitter, they tend to be very passionate about raising awareness of what they think is the #1 issue facing women today: the threat of violence and death. Every single life lost is one too many, of course, but the claim that more women than men are violently assaulted and murdered is simply not true. In his book, The Empathy Gap, William Collins discusses statistics about victims of violence and homicide in great detail. In the UK, in 2016, for example, 69% of homicide victims were men. This figure was 71% the following year. Homicide rates of men, but not women, consistently increased between 2015 and 2018. In the US, the average gender split of homicide victims is 78% men and 22% women. This shows that homicide is far from a women's issue. It is a human issue, which we should all be concerned about. Since men are more likely to get involved in physical confrontations, it makes sense that they are more likely both to be murdered and to be murderers. However, women do commit homicides too, and when they do, they are likely to receive shorter prison sentences than men. This is also true for all other types of crime. Women are so oppressed and disadvantaged, aren't they? The truth is, not only are women equal to men, but we are actually more equal in various ways. And all of the many other feminist claims to the contrary would be just as easy to debunk as the 10 myths I discussed in this video. If you'd like to hear me expose more delusional feminist claims, check out my YouTube channel. You will find me at YouTube/Greta Aurora. I'm also on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and Patreon. My website is gretaaurora.com. I am incredibly honored to have had the chance to participate at the International Conference on Men's Issues. Thank you so much for watching my video.